Good morning on this Sunday, December 19th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. It's a big economic win for Georgia. Governor Brian Kemp announces EV maker Rivian will build a $5 billion plant about an hour east of Atlanta. Also, a candidate for lieutenant governor files a bill to eliminate Dropboxes for voters. And Atlanta Mayor-elect Andre Dickens visits Buckhead to talk about crime. Melita, Phil, and Martha are all here. Bobby Capel is back filling in for Theron. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Georgia comes out on top again in its quest to land another vehicle manufacturing plant. This time it's Rivian, and the announcement means thousands of new jobs.
We got some good news that's going to be transformative, not only for 2022, but for generations to come.
Georgia leaders were all smiles Thursday as they announced EV maker Rivian will build a manufacturing and battery plant near Social Circle, about an hour east of Atlanta. Company officials say the plant would provide 7,500 jobs, a number that could grow to 10,000. Construction is set to begin next summer. The plant is expected to start manufacturing vehicles in 2024.
But it's even a better day to be announcing the largest single economic development project ever in our state's history.
But we're still waiting to find out the local and state tax incentives offered to land Rivian. But Martha, I got to say, this is quite a coup, and it's Rivian, right?
Yes.
Okay, we got to get that squared away since they are moving to Georgia.
That's right. We got to get it right. But our accent, we get a little leeway.
What about this? It's quite a coup for the governor.
It is a big announcement. It's a lot of jobs. It's probably a 10-year project. I mean, it'll start with breaking ground next year, and then it'll be construction jobs first, and then moving into 7,500 permanent jobs. I mean, this kind of this ought to be something everybody's happy about. I mean, this should not be partisan, and it is something everyone should be happy about. It's going to be great for folks.
Melita, is this something that everybody is happy about? And especially, I mean, politically for Governor Kemp, since former Senator Perdue announced he is going to run for governor.
I think it is a great achievement for Governor Kemp, but you have to look at some of the optics around this. You're giving up pristine farmland for green jobs, so there's a little bit of a dichotomy there. Martha brings up a good point about not yet knowing the cost incentives, the cost of the incentives awarded. And then the optics of that announcement were just a little bit off. The only two women there were the governor's wife and the chief people officer for the company, and there were no people of color anywhere at that announcement. And this is almost a growing majority minority state.
Phil?
Well, I don't think we ought to be looking all the time at people of color. Why do we have to inject that in everything? Whatever the color is, if they've done a good job and they belong at an event, let's have them there. I want to just talk about a couple people, and I'm sorry he's white, but Pat Wilson is the Commissioner of Economic Development. He has done a great job, and his team has been good. I would say that under Governor Nathan Deal and Governor Sonny Perdue, we've had great economic teams. I hope we continue this under a Republican administration, but I think we all agree this is a great coup. And of course, I want to give Governor Kemp credit. I do agree with you, though, Melita, that I think we need to look at the local and the state tax incentives. I'm sure in breaks, they're probably in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Well, and quickly, this is one of several areas that are being developed for just this kind of project throughout the state. So there's buy-in already from the communities and that kind of thing about bringing these kinds of businesses there. So it's not just going to be in this part of Georgia. There's 4 or 5 other places that are being developed for this kind of thing, because they're calling it shovel ready, to use an old term from the Obama days. It is shovel ready, where companies can come right in and get started.
And we've seen that with the Kia plant.
That's right.
Down LaGrange. Bobby, I want to switch gears a little bit because I want to talk about the fact that former Senator Perdue,
I remember him.
His strategy this week was to join in the lawsuit that claims counterfeit ballots were used in Fulton County
Here we go.
in the 2020 election.
Look, Phil and Martha are going to give me junk for this because I always bring up Donald Trump, they think, on the show.
You do. You're fixated.
Well, unfortunately, the guy who's running for governor is fixated on it, too. In fact, it's the whole basis for his campaign, which is why, to me, this is so ridiculous. The fact that he is running based on these ballots now being falsified. Look to your own Secretary of State, man. Brad Raffensperger is not a Democrat, despite what people on the right will have you feel. He certified the election because it was a fair and free election. Now, do we want to have improvements in elections? Of course. But the fact is, Donald Trump lost. okay? And the fact that we're still talking about it in 2021 now, what is it? We're almost into 2022. Get over it.
Well, Phil, is this a smart strategy? Because Fulton County Commission Chairman Rob Pitts, and I'm going to quote him here, he said to Perdue, stay the hell out of Fulton County.
Well, yeah, he would like for people to stay the hell out of Fulton County because it's been corrupt and mismanaged with the elections for over 25 years. Bobby forgets that. And you know what? That is not the central part of the David Perdue gubernatorial campaign.
What is
you
it?
know that? Well, you know, have you ever heard of banning critical race theory? Have you ever heard about inflation? Have you ever heard of rising crime in the state?
Now,
Let's
are
go
those
back.
things he
Let's go
disagrees
back.
with
Let me answer you on your the lawsuit. I think it's a great lawsuit. First of all, no evidence has ever been presented in a Georgia courtroom on election fraud brought by Trump lawyers. So when the media
There's a
says,
reason for
oh,
that.
when the media says, oh, these are disproven, no, the evidence has never been out there. So this is the first time, and it's probably going to go to Henry County Judge Amaro, where you're going to judge sworn statements under oath by election workers that there was mismanagement and fraud. Now, are they just lying willy-nilly? I'm glad that Senator Perdue is going to try to at least, we're not overturning the election, that's a myth. All we're trying to do is find some fraud and hold those people accountable.
Melita.
Trump's lawyers have largely been discredited because they don't hold to high standards of legal professionalism. And I liked Stacey Abrams' spokesperson's comment about David Perdue conducting the election conspiracy choir, because that's what he's running on. He may bring up these other issues later, but for right now, he's solely focused on the big lie of an election that 3 counts proved the winner was Biden in the state of Georgia.
You don't think there's fraud in Fulton County?
I don't think there's fraud in Fulton County. I just think it's the Republican dream.
Martha, I want to go to you because you did have the chance this week to interview Governor Brian Kemp.
Yeah, I mean, look, bottom line is, and I'm probably going to surprise Bobby here. What I would like to see Senator Perdue do is to look forward, to talk about the forward thinking. He is, whether the press is responsible or not, I think he is getting boxed into being the election integrity guy, which may work for him or not. I'm concerned about it because I do think he's got great ideas for the future, and I'd like to see that covered more than this. But you know, Fulton County's had problems since I was a kid voting into DeKalb in Fulton County when I was a young woman. Okay, there are issues that are long-term issues in Fulton County that are systemic, although I hate using that word, but they need to be dealt with. But I'm going to disagree with Phil. I don't think this is the way to do it.
I will just say there's a candidate for governor out there right now who's talking about uniting Georgia. Stacey Abrams.
Yeah, and she's also talking about visiting Georgia, which what has she been doing for the last 3 years? Avoiding Georgia.
And didn't she think she was
Brian
elected
Kemp's
governor?
been in Georgia for the last 3 years, visiting and doing and producing. So has David Perdue. Stacey Abrams has been largely out of Georgia.
Didn't she say there was fraud? Didn't Stacey Abrams say there was vote fraud back in 202018?
No, she did
you
not
never.
say there was voter fraud.
Yes, she did.
Yes, she did. Yes, she did. Oh, you better
Yes,
go
she
back.
No.
Melita, let me ask you, because Stacey Abrams did give an interview to our buddy Greg Bluestein at the AJC. She said she does plan to go all over Georgia, that Governor Kemp isn't listening to the people and watching the death toll climb when it comes to COVID-19.
And COVID-19 has taken far too many of our citizens. When Republican leaders prance around without masks and without promoting proper protocols and giving air to those who would deny COVID was a problem. But I think Stacey Abrams was on the campaign trail with Warnock and Ossoff in 2020, and she certainly went to all parts of the state in 2018. So I think you can't fault anybody for taking care during the COVID period. And I think we'll see her in all 159 counties.
All right.
But you go back to the fact Georgia's the 8th largest state in the country. It has the 8th highest level of cases. If you overlay Georgia with California, who had much higher restrictions, the curve looks the same. You've got to look at the data. You can't just go by your feelings.
And we'll leave that up to the voters. Coming up, lots more to come because we're going to be discussing the removal of ballot drop boxes. It's back on the table.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Senate President Pro Tem Butch Miller, who is also running for lieutenant governor, introduced legislation to do away with ballot Dropboxes. Bobby, Senator Miller says this is the next step in the fight to restore Georgians' faith in our election system.
So do we not have faith in mail either, is my question? I know that this has been a topic during the pandemic, that we can't put things in the mail because we don't believe that they're going to be opened and processed properly. You can't put them in a ballot drop box. What is the difference here? I don't understand the obsession the Republican Party, especially in Georgia, seems to have these days, to the point where their potential gubernatorial nominee is talking about this as a major campaign issue, David Perdue, that they have an obsession with trying to stop people from voting. What is the reason? If you guys are so happy with your ideas and you think it's so believable that everybody's going to come to your side, let people vote.
Well, Phil, let me ask you, because Georgia's new voting law did put tighter restrictions on these drop boxes. So was that enough to appease the critics?
Well, no, and I think Butch Miller stole that idea from me. I've been talking about having no drop boxes, period, end of discussion. I don't know why the Republican legislature did it already. But, you know, when a Secretary of State willy-nilly just throws out 1.2 million absentee ballots, whether you want one or not, in the mail, that's going to cause some problems. I would hope you would admit that.
Melita.
Well, these drop boxes were very popular, and I think the way that the new law constricts the use of them to early voting locations during office hours, so that your elderly people who need assistance, or your people in wheelchairs who before could just drive their van past a drop box and pop their ballot in the drop box from the van without having to get out and take their wheelchair out of the vehicle. There were some real aspects of drop boxes that were popular, that people liked. And with some Republicans, you may be cutting into your base by making it more difficult for them to vote, particularly
Martha,
with the elderly.
What is this obsession with Republicans and drop boxes?
Well, and let's not forget there were no drop boxes before COVID. It was something put in the emergency procedure. What I think Senate Bill 202 does is it clarifies how drop boxes should be done. And my view, and I don't want to disagree with Phil again, but my view is that 202 is in place. We've had a few municipal elections under it. It works. We need to let it run its course through 2022 and not change anything else in it. But that's fine. I don't think we're against drop boxes. I think we just want it to be secure. And you've got a mailbox at the end of your street. Everybody's got a drop box.
Let me mention one thing. It doesn't make any sense. The law now says the drop box has to be right in the precinct, where just one room later you vote. So, well, you know, if you got a wheelchair, just go on into the regular thing. And have you heard of the absentee ballot? That has worked. You know.
But it's nice to see you admit that a Republican idea like putting those drop boxes in the early voting locations doesn't make sense.
I've always said that.
All right, we're going to move on.
Okay.
We're going to move on. This week, a group of Republican lawmakers announced they're forming a new Freedom Caucus on the state level, modeled after the House Freedom Caucus. Martha, I want to ask you, what is the goal here?
I think it's like any caucus. They're like-minded people. They're getting together and they're gonna present certain kinds of legislation. I love it when people organize in groups like this. So I think having a Freedom Caucus on the state level works.
Bobby, is this an organization against some of the Republican leadership at the State House?
I'm sure the Speaker is not too thrilled about this, because if you ask former speakers at the federal House, John Boehner, what they thought of the, quote, Freedom Caucus up in D.C. when they had to deal with it, it was just a pain in their rear end every time they were trying to get everything accomplished.
Candidates, right?
Yeah.
Are you going to be in the Freedom Caucus?
Yeah, exactly, before their supporter.
The leader of this Freedom Caucus has been historically a pain in the rear end of Speaker Ralston. Philip Singleton is a challenger to the Speaker, and several of the others who are in this caucus are not favorites even amongst the Republican leadership. So it's some of them are.
Phil, are there strength in numbers, though, for them?
You know what? Anytime there's a caucus, you're going to have people as points of reference. As a conservative, I'm always in favor of conservatives pressuring people in their own party to more move to the right. That's right. And so the same thing happens in the Democratic caucus. You've got your communist and socialist friends trying to pressure everybody to the left.
I assure you, Phil, there's no communist or socialist caucus in the Georgia State House.
Well, thank goodness. Thank goodness. But I don't see anything wrong with it. It's a caucus. You have different ideas.
All right, let's move on to Medicaid expansion, because the Biden administration sent its top negotiator to Georgia this week, but she did not meet with Governor Kemp on his waiver plans, which were approved by the Trump administration, but halted under President Biden. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of Georgians remain uninsured. Melita, I want to get your take on this.
Well, I think that the Kemp waiver plan covers fewer people for more money than just approving the expansion of Medicaid. Also, the Kemp administration has not addressed the fact that Georgia has the highest one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the developed world, and that's a rate that's 3 times higher for black women, and it's a real issue that has not been addressed. And so there are some real problems with the Kemp proposals on Medicaid.
What's it going to take to get something moving on this issue, Martha? Because there's hundreds of millions of dollars just being left on the table.
I think something like 52 bills have been passed in the Kemp administration that deal with different aspects of health care. Okay, so they have been dealing with different issues related to health care. I asked him about this today, about the waivers, or when I talked to him on Friday, and he did talk about how they are going to be able to offer more choice to people at less money on the part that is allowing to go forward, and he still wants to see this. I would have liked to have seen someone from the Biden administration, if they came down here to talk about Medicaid expansion, to talk to the governor's office about this. I think that would be something, if they're going to try to be bipartisan in nature, it would be nice to see them, since they do work for a federal agency, they're not necessarily a partisan, they should be talking to everyone.
Bobby, were you surprised they didn't meet with the governor's office?
I mean, that could have been the governor that wouldn't meet with them. You know, you think Brian Kemp's going to meet with Joe Biden in the middle of a re-election fight against David Perdue? I don't think so. But here's the deal. I have never understood why Republicans don't want to take money that we are paying into the system as Georgians. We're paying for this Medicaid support.
Because there's no guarantee how many years it's going to be there.
Well, I can guarantee
you have to pay for it.
Oh, understanding that, but you can always adjust a budget. That we do it every year in politics. Every year we get new budgets. But what I don't understand is there's money on the table right now that is our own money that we have all paid for, and we are waving it off, despite the fact there are several Republican governors across the country who have said, "Of course we're going to take that. Of course." I don't know.
A complete expansion would cost billions over the next 10 to 15 years, and you just think print more money, and it's no problem.
We paid for it.
I gotta
you and
leave
I
it there.
have paid for it.
I gotta leave it there, guys. Thank you. Coming up, Atlanta Mayor-elect Andre Dickens turns his attention to Buckhead. We'll discuss straight ahead.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Atlanta Mayor-elect Andre Dickens met with Buckhead residents and realtors this week and addressed the city's violent crime and even talked about visiting nightclubs that are causing problems. I mean, Phil, just the fact that Dickens was in Buckhead, I think, speaks volumes.
Well, that's right. I'm glad he finally went into unfamiliar territory, and he did some good things. He attended some police roll calls, too. I don't believe Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms has ever done that.
Yeah, that was very positive.
And I also think that, yeah, there is a nightclub problem, and obviously we've got a horrible rising shooting and murder rate. So, as I said last week, I'm going to give him 100 days. I did talk with one of his transition team members, and they heard what I said last week and some other panelists recently. He's got to respect due process for all law enforcement officers involved in a shooting case, rightly or wrongly. And so I'm told that Mayor-elect Dickens has been told that, and let's see if he'll say that.
Melita, he's not even in office yet, and yet he's out there.
Well, he's hitting the ground running in a very good way. I think he's making a very positive impression on a lot of people. And Phil, he's been in Buckhead before. He has a daughter at the Atlanta Girls School, so you can't dig him on that. And I think he's really his focus on the fact that, and this goes back to his being a chemical engineer that the two of you talked about last week. He's spouting the statistics about the fact that the majority of crimes are committed by young people between the ages of 13 and 25, and he really wants to focus on gang crime. And I think he's just bringing a new approach that's much needed to the office of Atlanta Mayor.
It's refreshing, Martha.
And I know we focus a lot on Atlanta mayor's race, but if you look around at the mayors that were elected in November, you're seeing a lot of these newly elected mayors kind of hitting the ground running and doing a lot of things ahead of time that they wouldn't normally do. We're seeing it in towns all across Georgia. So, you know, I think it's exciting, really, because these mayors are really taking serious what they're doing.
Well, you know, on our way out, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms has appointed a new executive. Jaquel Clemens Moore will be a director of the city's newly created Office of Violence Reduction. Bobby, is this needed, or could the money have been used elsewhere?
Well, something was definitely needed. I mean, I think we can all agree on this panel that we had to do something in the city of Atlanta about the crime problem. We just did have an election that elected a new mayor, in Andre Dickens, which I, by the way, said last week to Phil, This is the kind of guy who will go and talk to anybody. He's approachable. He'll listen. And look what he did 1 week later. He's already doing it. So my point is that, look, the new mayor will take a look at this. He's going to have jurisdiction over this. He's going to decide what he wants done, and he's going to do it. And he should be given the leash to do it, you know?
Phil, I know you want to weigh in on this.
Well, it's needless bureaucracy. A police chief, the command staff, the mayor ought to be dedicated to stopping violence in a city. And so I don't know if this is going to do anything. I want to see something. I'm glad that Mayor-elect Dickens has pivoted. I think he now wants to get a new police chief right away. And I think let's do a national search and let's get the right person. That'll do more than this needless bureaucracy.
Wouldn't you hate to be the person appointed a month before the person who appointed you leaves?
Well, Melita, I want to ask you, could this person, though, really focus on those young folks that you just mentioned?
I think she could, and I think that's precisely what her background is. And so I believe that she'll be able to hit the ground running a little bit while Mayor-elect Dickens figures out who he wants on his team. And I'm sure he'll look at her, but she does have an impeccable resume, and her skill set falls within that whole gang violence idea.
Is this a good idea in order to address the youth, the crime wave among our youth and the water boys that we always talk about?
I think it is. I mean, look, we'll see what she can accomplish, but again, you know, we're going to have a new administration and, you know, very soon, and Mayor Dickens may take a different tack.
All right, we'll leave it there, folks. Coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Bobby, I'll start with you this week because we did find out you're still in your 30s.
Yes, for a few more months, I guess. Okay, so I want to start with winners. To all of the teachers out there who have worked this entire first semester with COVID. It's kind of the first real semester back, especially for the kindergarten, K through, you know, whatever, all the way up. People have been dealing with it in high school, middle school, elementary school. Big thank you. Enjoy your 2 weeks off because our kids are coming right back in January. And as far as losers, I think just taking a step back here, I know this isn't the year-end show yet, but I'm just going to throw one out here. If the Georgia Republican Party, because if you had told them a year after what went down on January 6th and everything that happened with Brad Raffensperger and Governor Kemp, that they'd still be dealing with this same thing now with David Perdue running a campaign on it, I think they would not be pleased.
All right, Phil.
Well, unlike the Democrats were in favor of stopping fraud. But anyhow, on a happier note, I have got Joe Gebbia Jr. He went to Brookwood High School in Gwinnett County. He is now, I think, in Silicon Valley doing very well successfully, but he gave $500,000 to the school for a visual arts program. He gave another $200,000 for track and field, and that's really giving back. So he's my winner. And yes, Melita, yes, I'm sorry to have to say this, but Biden is my loser, President Biden. I think, thankfully, the big reckless spending on infrastructure and all these other goodies, amnesty for illegals, is dying. And who was always just in a lockstep for it? Both our Democrat senators, Ossoff and Warnock. Why couldn't they be like Joe Manchin or Christian Sinema and at least show some respect for fiscal restraint?
I usually don't allow debate, but I will today in winners and losers if you want to respond, Melita.
Well, actually, one of my winners this week is Senator Raphael Warnock, who gave a brilliant speech hailed by a lot of media as rousing and passionate about voting rights. And he's demonstrating why the pulpit committee of Ebenezer called him to begin with, and now he's enjoying his bully pulpit for the most important congregation in the world, the U.S. Senate. And I'll be bipartisan and make another winner, House Speaker David Ralston, who is proving to be the grown-up in the GOP room as we approach the next session. And I think he'll tamp down on some of the more partisan political issues and see that the House and the Senate move in a more forward-thinking direction. And my loser this week is something that we can all be happy about, because the Georgia Supreme Court handed down a verdict that makes losers out of all those people who boot cars in parking lots.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up.
And I'm hoping that more city councils will follow suit and pass laws that are the same.
I agree. I hate those things. All right, Martha.
I want to make my winner this week all the people that have joined together to help the folks in Kentucky, especially in my community. Siphon Logistics sent 4 trucks up there already with things that they've needed, and we've got things that are happening all throughout the weekend and next week of getting the things that those folks need. Our folks have pulled together, and not a single Kentuckian had to stay in a shelter. They all got taken in by friends and neighbors. And Chris Draft, former NFL Atlanta Falcons player, he lost his wife to lung cancer. I lost my mom and dad to lung cancer. We got together this week to try to help raise more awareness on lung cancer. I feel like he's my brother from another mother because we just got together so well. But thank you for the work you're doing, Chris, to notify people and tell people about lung cancer prevention. And, you know, I'm not going to say a loser, but a little warning shot. We're doing all this stuff with electric cars, batteries, we don't know how to dispose of them yet. So let's start thinking about that problem.
Good idea. Thank you all. Thank you. And my winner is the Rough Draft Atlanta newsletter. It's a concise newsletter of what you need to know happening in Metro Atlanta. It comes out Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and we could all support more journalism. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week. We will see you again next week. And Merry Christmas. Bye.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.